Hey, it's Ben, and this is by Beepstreet. This video is going to be about a time stretch patch called Glacial that you can get from Patch Storage. Um, it stretches time using samples and a granular approach. This isn't going to be like a bread and butter time stretch tool. You can just go in really quickly and say you want to stretch something 200% or whatever. But it lets you stretch samples, and I think it's pretty useful. There's a couple different ways that you could use this. Anyways, I'm going to walk through the controls, just give you a couple different use cases, and then explain how it's built. So first thing, just to keep in mind, it is a time stretch for Flexi. So you need a sample. It doesn't work on live audio. And essentially what it's doing is it's using 8 different unison voices. So pressing one key is using all 8 voices. And it's basically just re-triggering the sample very quickly and then in like varying amounts for it to sound smoother. And it moves through the sample slowly by modulating the offset, or quickly, but if we're stretching, we're going to want to move slowly through. So it's sort of like a granular time stretch, but I think it sounds pretty convincing at certain settings on certain samples. So I am going to probably use it. This is me talking. Let me speed it up a little bit. Hey, it's Ben, and this is Drambo by Beepstreet. Okay, so it does not alter the pitch at all. Hey, it's Ben. So silly. And then you can modify everything on the fly also, so it's not like you apply the time stretch and then hear it. Everything's kind of happening in real time. So just add in something else. Lenny Williams always sounds good. Okay, so you've got your README if you want to look through that. It just has basically each control is explained. Unison, this is sort of like setting the density. So it's by default, it's set up for 8 voices, and you'll hear the difference, I think. So this is one grain basically being re-triggered. It just sounds thicker. It kind of like fills in the sound a little bit. If you want to, this is just kind of cool, you can detune each voice. And at really low settings, you sort of get like a chorusing effect. You have some modulators, and this is to actually get the movement through the sample for like the time stretch. Otherwise, it would just be frozen in one place, and you can hear what that sounds like. So here we're not moving at all through the sample. I can manually move the offset and basically scrub through. And then freeze, and that's a fun way to use this too. But by adding in modulation on the offset, we get a little bit of movement. So rate basically controls how fast we go through the LFO. And because it's the graphic modulator, we can also go backwards. Now it's not playing the samples in reverse, but because they're triggering so quickly, it kind of sounds like it's going in reverse. The offset is going backwards, but it is not actually playing any of the sound in reverse. It's just sort of like an illusion, if you will. So the time stretch LFO, I would use this as like going all the way through the sample. And then jitter would be like going back and forth a little bit. And, you know, if you wanted to, I should actually build this in. You could modulate this by voice. So something like this. So now each voice is going to be a little bit different in the jitteriness. Yeah, it just sounds a little bit different. Rather than everything being right in time with each other. I'll probably make that adjustment to the patch. And obviously you can customize everything. It's fine. So I'm going to leave that. So that's jitter, and then of course you could change what kind of LFO you were using and the amount of jitter. Either using the amount under the LFO or the mixer. But basically both time stretch and jitter are being summed in the mixer, and then that's being sent to modulate offset. So then I'm going to skip ahead. The grain size, this is another LFO. And this is, it's doing a couple things. So it's actually sending out a pulse signal. It says it's a saw up LFO, and it is, but it's sending a pulse, which is actually triggering the flexies. So if we bring this all the way down, just going to go to one voice. Okay, so here, you can hear it. It's getting a little bit. So that's just one voice. If we turn it up, now it sounds more stretchy or granular. So for me, I think anywhere from like 1 or 2 hertz up to like 20. I don't know, for some samples, even like up to 30. To me, that's the most useful. When you have 8 voices and you turn it up all the way, you get some basically like audio rate triggering and some phasing stuff happening. I don't really like how that sounds, but you know, on certain samples it might sound cool, or you might like that sound, and it's fine. But for me, I'd say anywhere from like 1 hertz up to 20 or something is the most usable. That's like the sweet spot for this. So it's controlling how frequently the sample is being retriggered. And then you're going to see that frequency is modulated a little bit by this scale parameter. That's hidden, but basically, if we uncompact the whole patch, scale is taking the voice number, and again, these are unison voices, but voice number is basically values 0 through 7. And that needs to be scaled down to be usable, because most parameters in Drambo are, it's like -1 to 1 are the values. So it's just scaling it down to be like 0 through around 1, instead of 0 through 7 for the different voices. So each voice is, you know, voice 1 is triggering actually at 19 hertz, 19.89 hertz. And then, excuse me, voices above that are going a little bit faster. And yeah, I think you can just leave scale here, but if you do turn it down, so though it's almost like a comb filter sort of thing there. Sounds cool. But if you want to retain the like sound of the sample, you don't want too much of that phasing sound. If you go up really high, you get near that audio rate range, which I don't think sounds very good. So You can just leave this here, or you can experiment with it. It's okay. And then phase is just controlling, again, per voice, where the LFO actually is. So I'm going to uncompact it. Now the other modulators, you have frequency envelope, which is going to basically act as an envelope on the grain size frequency, and then offset envelope. You can use these to achieve like some extra movement in the sound, or if you want like a transient sound like right away, not very granular, and then to ramp up to like the time stretchy granular sort of sound. I use another sample for that. So it sounds good on like, I use this with like sample like hip hop samples, or for making hip hop sort of beats. But you can use this on drums. You could use this on like your own samples that you create. Use it on anything, obviously. But here's a drum break. I'll get it right on the transient. So if we were just to, you're going to hear it's sort of like, well, you can hear the transient. It's okay, but it doesn't really sound anything like the original drum. But what we can do, if we bring the frequency down all the way, we don't want to hear it doing that over and over again. Here. And let's get rid of this time stretching a little bit. Okay. So that's what it sounds like. And we want that like transient. So what we could do is we're going to trigger it right there, but then we're going to quickly go up just in like a couple milliseconds to that really like, now it's like sort of we're stretching not on the transient. And if we want to move, you can see it. It's just triggering right there. If we want to like trigger and then maybe loop it around this area, well, we can use the offset envelope for that. And so kind of just have to do all of this to like by ear. Okay, so it's almost like you hit the drum and then you get a little drum roll, which I think sounds pretty cool. You're not actually doing a drum roll, you're just looping not on the transient, so it doesn't sound like you're hitting the drum over and over again, which would be kind of annoying. And then you could change the frequency. So you still get a nice transient sound, but then you're like looping on another part. But you're not just doing like a loop region in flexi with one voice going back and forth where it doesn't really sound realistic. So you can use this to like freeze someone's voice or an instrument and get really like crazy sounds, or you could use this more like functionally just to, that's a nice little drum sound. Anyways, so I'm gonna take those modulations away, reset, and we'll put the time stretch back in real slow. And then over here, I mean, these are just like the flexi controls, so they don't need to say too much about that. Obviously, you'll adjust the offset envelope amount if you want to use that, and then stretch, you can leave it at 100 if you want to be able to go through the entire sample, like scan through it. Or you could, if you're like trying to fine tune something, you could make it stretch smaller. So just to hear how like different frequency sizes on the grain size sound, I'm gonna mess around with that. And speed. Speed's important too, like time stretch speed. So we can like, so here, change our offset a little bit. So this is a relatively like a low grain size or low frequency. Speed it up a little bit. That's a little bit more freezy. Slow it way down. So we're basically not moving through the sample. Could add a tiny bit of jitter. So now the voices are moving a little bit. If we go up to like so there's where, you know, it just adds in some unwanted tones that I don't love when you get up really high there. However, if you're going through like a little bit quicker,
whenever it's early twilight. Whenever it's early twilight.
You might want to use a different setting. So this is really all about like experimenting, finding a setting that works. If you're actually using this to like stretch a sample, you could just zero in for like what works for your purpose and then just resample it using like the sampler module. Or you could like p-lock all of this. So slow it down a little bit, and then we're gonna go a lot slower than that. Actually, let's slow this down for everything. So I can sort of like chop it, if you will. So now it's just really slow. And I'm not going to resample right now, but you could just like record these as little snippets and then play it back how you want. So I think it's a lot of fun, and I like these sort of like really textured, slowed down sounds. I just think they sound cool. Only other control on here that I think is important to note. You can hear this especially when it gets a little bit faster. So if there's no smoothing, you can kind of just hear it in the background. It's sort of like a grainy, like there's some artifacts there that don't sound bad, but they're there. And you can barely hear it. They're not. Some of them are not there anymore when it's on the smooth setting. All this is basically, unpack it again. So the grain size LFO, it's running through a graphic shaper to turn it into a pulse. So it'll re-trigger the sample, and you can see that's what's triggering Flexi. And then it's also running a graphic modulator. See the clock is attached. Going through this, it's just sort of like a bell shape. So when the sample re-triggers, the shape starts here at 0, and then it smoothly ramps up, pretty smooth. Not like a perfect curve, but that is being used when it's on the smooth setting to multiply the audio signal from Flexi. So you're cutting out the sharp, like the re-triggering sound. If you weren't at like a 0 crossing, you'd get a little click, and that's what that rough sound is. And you'll hear this even more. What I'll do, you go down to one voice. We're on smooth right now, so you can hear it. So this is smooth, and now rough. And you might want to use the rough setting sometime, especially for drums. You might want to have it on rough. But when you get faster, that's where you get some of those artifacts. And then especially if you add in all of the voices, and you just cut a little bit of that out with smooth. It's the best I could do. So this smooth fading, that's just the index for the end to one mixer, which has the smooth graphic modulator, and then the not smooth or the rough graphic modulator, which is just multiplying the signal by 1. And actually, no, I think that's what I would have to do. Or I could have just put in like a 1 value, and that would have been fine too. So they go through a multiply by the smoothing and the flexi, and that goes into an amp envelope. And so that's the rack. After that, you just have some effects. So I kind of thought this lent itself to some of the lo-fi character from the decimator. Add in some reverb, and it sounds really nice. You can kind of accentuate or attenuate certain frequencies. Attenuate. Because it's not a clean time stretch to begin with. It's not that clean. And you can just add some extra character to it with these effects. But you don't have to use it. If you're trying to save on CPU, you could just delete these modules. That'd be fine. So I think I actually kind of explained it as I went along, or how it works. So that's it. If you have any questions, you can just either leave a comment here or leave a comment on the patch storage. If you have ideas on how this could be made better, you can either just implement them and upload it to patch storage, or comment here, or drop by the Beepstreet forum and chat with some cool people who all really like Drambo. Anyways, have fun.